These animals that are washing up in the shore are in a sense kind of the martyrs. They're the martyrs that are basically letting us know something's wrong.
It's a new technology. It's an enormously loud technology, unlike anything that we've ever seen before. And it poses unique risks to the ocean ecosystem.
I don't want to say anything is expendable, but in the course of doing the operations, some of those mammals could get hurt. There's no question about that.
In September last year, as Spanish and other NATO warships conducted training manoeuvres around the Canary Islands off the North African coast, the first victims were washing ashore.
Algunos todavía están vivos y otros que van muriendo, al menos intentar remolcarlos mar adentro, a ver si podemos salvar al menos 6 o 7 de los 12 o 14 que han llegado a las costas de Fuerteventura.
Es una imagen muy fea para nosotros y para el que nos visita. Usted dice que le encanta venir a nuestras islas. ¿Cómo viene y nos destroza la isla de esta manera?
Scientists and concerned environmentalists had put up the red flag years before, in warning that the use of experimental long-range sonar systems was killing whales and dolphins. Finally, here was a very public demonstration of their concerns.
The thing is that this took place on a beach very crowded by tourists. So at that time the press and the tourists were there when the military started these maneuvers. And so everybody could witness how the whales were actually stranding.
Whales and dolphins are acoustic animals. In the dark depths of the world's oceans, sound, not vision, is the key to survival. Whales, especially deep-diving whales, use a highly evolved sonar system to do everything, from locating food and mating partners to simply finding their way. But human-generated noise is putting them at risk.
The more noise we put in the ocean, the more we affect the way to communicate and to orientate in the ocean. And this means that we are compromising their survival. We're compromising the way they look for their food. We're compromising the way they breed.
In the last 25 years, it's increased, anthropogenic noise levels have increased tenfold.
Michael Stocker is an acoustician, working on everything from audio engineering Hollywood blockbusters to measuring noise levels under the ocean. He's concerned that if the US Navy gets its way, thousands of whales and dolphins could be deafened, leading to more mass beachings.
So the sound that they're proposing using will be throughout 80% of the oceans.
Very much akin to this, and this will go on for hours.
They have what they call a ping, which is a 100-second duration blast of that, but that will be going on for 40 hours a month.
When we first heard about it, it was almost too unbelievable. The idea that we've now developed this technology so powerful that it could literally light up an entire ocean basin with sound.
California-based environmental attorney Joel Reynolds first learned of the US Navy's secret plans nearly a decade ago when he heard rumours about the use of a new low-frequency active sonar system.
In the summer of 1994, an exercise called Magellan 2 had been undertaken off the coast of California. Nobody knew anything about it. It wasn't publicly disclosed. It was a top secret activity of the U.S. Navy, and it involved testing of a very loud new submarine detection system called low-frequency active sonar. So I began to investigate. There was no information publicly available at that time, but we pulled together what we could.
Soon the Navy decided to come clean. Joel Reynolds and his team at the National Resources Defence Council had recently taken on the Mexican government and the Mitsubishi Company over whale conservation in a high-profile campaign. Anxious to head off a legal battle, the Navy acknowledged that its system existed and agreed to an environmental impact assessment.
The U.S. Navy has recently developed a new type of sonar called LFA, or low-frequency active sonar, to detect enemy submarines that might threaten our national security. This new LFA system can detect very quiet submarines because low-frequency sound travels farther.
This internet-quality promotional video is the only officially sanctioned material available to the public. According to the US Navy, a 3-phase study of its low-frequency active sonar by some of America's leading scientists demonstrated that it's perfectly safe.
This is the sound of LFA sonar used by the Navy, which is similar in tone to humpback whales.
In Phase 3, when we were studying singing whales in Hawaii, we did find times when playbacks occurred that singing humpbacks stopped singing and moved away from the source vessel. But these reactions tended to stop after 15 to 30 minutes.
At this point, I don't foresee, given the restrictions that have been imposed, self-imposed by the Navy in terms of where they would go, when they would use it, that there would ever be any long-term impact.
But in the last couple of years, most scientists have come to believe the opposite.
I don't think anybody disputes the fact that this system, if operated as proposed by the Navy, would harass and even injure thousands and thousands of marine mammals. And that doesn't even address what the potential impacts would be for other marine species like fish or sea turtles or whatever else lives in the ocean and depends on the ocean. The fact is that the Navy has conducted tests on its own divers and found that the system is potentially very harmful to divers as well. So there's no question that this system, if deployed, will do harm.
Everything the military does is a great concern to me, especially because I represent more military than any other member of the United States Congress. I have more bases here, more people here.
Congressman Ed SCHROCK from Norfolk, Virginia, isn't ashamed to admit that his background as a US Navy officer probably helped him into office. It also landed him a seat on the influential Armed Services Committee in the US Congress. He says deployment of the sonar system is a necessary risk.
If we have to send our men and women, put them in uniform and send them into battle somewhere, it's incumbent on us to bring them home. And if some of the environment has to be or would be impacted to have that happen, I think that's a small price to pay.
These pictures were taken by a whale researcher in the Bahamas on March 15, 2000. A rarely seen beaked whale flounders in distress. Within hours, reports of more beachings along a 100-mile stretch of coastline. 16 in all, 13 of the deep-diving beak whales, 2 minke whales and a dolphin.
Coincidentally, some of these whales stranded literally in the backyard of a marine scientist who understands stranding, understands acoustics, and previously had spent many years working as an acoustician with the U.S. Navy.
It was a bizarre beaching with no apparent cause. But when reports came in of US Navy warships off the Bahamas coast, the quick-thinking researcher started ringing international alarm bells.
And he reacted very, very quickly cut off the heads of some of those whales, put them in a freezer at a local restaurant, and eventually shipped them off to Harvard Medical School. Tests were conducted, and there was a definitive connection reached between the use by the U.S. Navy of sonar and the death of these whales. That's the first time that scientists were able to establish definitively, to a degree that the U.S. Navy could not deny their involvement, that the activity had a connection, had a cause and effect relationship to the death of whales.
In its official report into the Bahamas strandings, the US Navy itself was clear in its findings.
Some type of auditory structural damage was found in 4 beaked whales examined, specifically bloody effusions or hemorrhage near and around the ears. The investigation team concludes that tactical mid-range frequency sonars aboard U.S. Navy ships that were in use during the sonar exercise in question were the most plausible source of this acoustic or impulse trauma.
My father was in the Navy. I very much like the Navy and what it stands for. But, so it's very hard for me to fight those people. But we cannot have a dialogue. They refuse the dialogue.
Jean-Michel Cousteau is possibly the world's most famous living diver and a well-known friend to whales of all descriptions. He's also a staunch opponent of the use of high-intensity sonar.
Obviously, nobody wants to see lives being lost, but I'll have to add, any lives. We're not in a situation of urgency here. And if we consider terrorism a big issue, I don't think there's a lot of terrorists who are going to attack any country with submersibles or submarines. To continue is a criminal act, literally not acceptable. And in the face of future generations, we have no rights to do that. Just a few months ago, I picked up a garbage bag at sea, and it was one of the major United States aircraft carrier that had dumped the bag overboard, and they didn't even have the good sense of destroying the equipment that was in there. This is how the most powerful nation, the most powerful navy of the world is treating the ocean, like a garbage can.
But in July last year, the US Fisheries Service gave the Navy the go-ahead to implement the global sonar system in 75% of the world's oceans. Reynolds and his team argued that this violated America's tough environmental protection laws.
We were hoping that there'd be some way to reach an accommodation with the Navy where they would recognize that the potential consequences of deploying a system like this over 75% of the oceans were not worth the risk. That this system simply was not technologically ready for global deployment. Unfortunately, we could not reach a meeting of the minds on that. They decided to go forward, and we really had no alternative but to sue, and that's what we did.
Backed by the National Resources Defence Council, Joel Reynolds, Jean-Michel Cousteau and a handful of concerned environmental groups took the Navy to court in August last year, arguing that it was in breach of the Environmental Policy Act. With Reynolds' lawsuit barely lodged, more evidence of the dangers of high-intensity sonar was soon broadcast on news pictures around the world. With NATO naval frigates deployed offshore, this mass stranding on the Spanish-administered Canary Islands offered damning proof that high-intensity military sonar did kill. The victims were the same as in the Bahamas, the rare, shy, deep-diving beaked whales.
Es increíble que hoy en día digamos que estamos en Europa, que estamos y tengamos pues el espectáculo que estamos viendo todo el mundo, ¿no? Es increíble pues ver miles de personas que están ahora mismo pues sin saber qué es lo que está pasando aquí. Vemos todos estos barcos enfrente, vemos los submarinos aquí a 600 metros, vemos los animales mamíferos llegando y muriendo a la orilla.
In the Canaries, what we have is something happened, and we do think it's a sound source, which produced lesions in the whales present in the area, and the same source produced the same lesions in all the whales present in the area, which can only be explained by an acoustic source.
Researchers on the University of Las Palmas team knew that this was the first chance to obtain fresh evidence of the cause and effect between sonar and whale deaths. Samples from the Bahamas stranding had been frozen, not ideal for definitive results. Responding quickly, heads were cut off 7 of the beaked whales so that their ears could be extracted and studied. It was down to the team vet, EDUARDO DEGOLLADA, to get the first results.
What I can say right now is that, of course, there are some alterations, some pathologies, and I know that this will help to understand the whole process and what happened.
What Eduardo found was the first conclusive proof that high-intensity sonar had inflicted severe tissue damage to mammals' brains and ears, which caused them to beach themselves.
Well, no, it's not normal. I mean,
it's not normal.
No.
The Canary Islands are heavily reliant on tourist dollars, including a big whale-watching component. So dead whales are bad news. So seriously did authorities take the matter that at the sign of the first stranded whales, the military exercises were halted and prosecutors opened a criminal investigation. Thousands of miles away, the legal challenge against the US Navy was gearing up in San Francisco. At the end of October, a federal court judge made a decision which sent shockwaves through the Pentagon and delighted environmentalists, issuing a temporary injunction stopping the Navy from proceeding with global deployment. The judge wrote that at the very least, marine mammals would certainly be harassed by the long-distance sonar, and that full deployment of the system would be in breach of federal laws. That's paved the way for a major legal battle to take place here later this year, and which environmentalists believe is their best chance of thwarting the US Navy and saving marine mammals from harm.
It's the only chance we have, for the moment anyway. And the encouraging thing is that it has taken a good turn, but we're not done yet.
And the US Navy is not done yet either. If they can't beat the law, they may simply change it. The Pentagon has mounted a campaign to change America's tough environmental regulations. What they're seeking is exemption for the military from all environmental controls. And in the current climate of the war on terror, they may get away with it.
If there's any consistency in the pressure that this administration is putting on Congress, there will be definitely many attempts to relax the environmental laws and go back to the 60s. And it's very scary because it's 20 or 30 years of very hard work on the part of a lot of good people that is being slowly dismantled.
I think the military, frankly, are the best stewards of the environment of any group I've ever known. It's just amazing some of the things they do, and people don't, by and large, understand that, but they do. They are not going to go out and intentionally harm it. But we're in a wartime environment now, which could extend well beyond Iraq, you know, it's in Afghanistan, and if it goes beyond Iraq, and it probably will, all these things need to be taken into consideration. Some easing of regulations might have to be enacted in order to successfully bring this to a conclusion.
The Navy uses the phrase full spectrum dominance. When I hear that, the idea of not dominating the sea somehow doesn't line up with that, doesn't square with that phrase. So of course, any military, their total desire is to dominate all quarters.
The terms of the injunction mean that the Navy can still test its system until the results of the court case later this year. Testing has been confined to one specific area, in the Northern Marianas section of the Pacific Ocean, where whales and dolphins are scarce. But activists are concerned that even there, marine life is suffering irreparable harm.
They chose that area because it wasn't particularly productive in terms of what they call productive in terms of whales and dolphins, but there are a lot of other sea animals that live there. There's good probability right now that that program is deafening unbelievable amounts of life in the deep, deep sea. We're talking about 35,000 feet deep in some cases, and we will never know.
You can restore the environment in many cases. You can never bring back somebody's son or daughter, and you don't want to have a lot of body bags coming home, as we had in Vietnam, and we did. And of course, you can imagine they tore the daylights out of the environment in Vietnam, but we don't want to do that if we can avoid it. But I think the safety of our men and women in uniform has to be paramount.